Chapter 50 Sphinx Rock. The steep wooden staircase leading down to the beach was crowded with gawkers when we pulled up. People were hanging over the railing and looking out towards the Sphinx. Sure enough, the little lone figure was huddled near the head. The rock was already half submerged, but the path back to the shore was already completely underwater. The kid was hugging their knees and looking out to the grey sky and horizon. The three menaces we'd followed had already ditched their bikes and were racing down the wooden stairs, joining a bunch of other kids. "I don't see the lifesavers or ambos anywhere," Jed said, removing his helmet and running his fingers through his sweat-wet hair. "There are no lifesavers around, not until December," I said, and felt my heartbeats kick up with the words and what they meant. There were so many people standing around and staring, but no one was doing anything to help. "How long do you think before he's under?" Aiden asked, a waver in his voice. I could feel Sam shiver beside me. "Dunno, maybe an hour?" Jed said. I leaned against his shoulders, feeling as though I might fall over from his words. While we were watching that huddled little figure, the tide seemed to get higher still and the waves crashing against the Sphinx's hind legs. "It's Merjame," Sam said, and I turned to look at him. "It is? She cut all her hair off, but it's her." When I looked again, I knew it too. It was Merjame down there. She'd come to the beach, she knew, when she'd been caught thieving. Aiden stepped back as though to get a better look at the problem. "I reckon if I hug the spit, I can walk and swim to where the rock meets the cliff, then climb up and get to them." But his voice faded, as he came to the same realization I had. There was no way. Aiden was just a kid himself, and the waves were crashing harder and harder. And then a roar sounded somewhere behind us, followed by a siren, and we all turned around to see a motorbike coming down the dirt path. Blue and white checkered pattern on the front shield and blue light flashing up the back. "Luca!" By now some of the crowd on the staircase were making their way back to the top to see. Luca dismounted from his motorbike, pulled off his helmet and instantly glared at me. Tourists weren't meant to be at this beach because of the king tide, and neither were we. "We were just," I started to explain as he came over. "Later," he said, before his radio crackled. It sounded like Penny on the other end, saying, "ETA 15 minutes, this road's a shocker." Luca came to the ledge and looked over. Aiden sidled up next to him and pointed to where the Sphinx rock met the cliff face, in a craggy bit of low granite that was only just above the tide. "There's still sand left along the back shore. I reckon you can walk and swim out to the rock, then climb up and get to him." "Her," I said, and Luca looked over at me. "It's Merjame, one of the girls from the Haven." The radio on Luca's lapel crackled again, but I couldn't make out what Penny said this time, or Luca's coded reply. My heart was pounding and I squeezed my shaking hands together. "Where are the lifesavers? The ambos?" I asked, once the voice on the two-way stopped. "The ambulance nearly hit a pothole on the road in. Only my bike could get down that track easily," Luca said. "And we've had to pull the call out for volunteer surf rescue since they're not on duty, but they wouldn't be able to get a boat close enough anyway, because of those rocks." And then he seemed to remember we were just kids, maybe because Sam had started crying a little bit. "Don't worry, they're on their way." Just then, a collective gasp went up from the crowd on the staircase, and we looked over the railing to see what was happening. Merjame, in her sopping wet tracksuit and worn-out runners, had stood up and was slowly trying to walk backwards towards the tail end of the Sphinx, but the rocks were so wet and she misstepped and slammed down hard on one knee. When she stood up again, her pants were torn and bright red blood was trickling down her exposed white leg. The crowd almost began to chant at her when it looked like she might start walking back again towards the shore, even though that end was clearly submerged. She looked up at the staircase, and all of us, and even from that far away, I could see she was crying. But either the pain in her leg or the warning chants of the crowd made her plant her butt again and try not to walk back to the shore. Luca seemed to shake himself, and as I watched, his eyes gained focus. He quickly started stripping down until he stood in just his white t-shirt and boxers. "You're staying up here no matter what," he said, looking at each of us. "Is that understood?" He looked between me and Sam, and it wasn't until we both nodded that he turned away. He went to the top of the staircase. "I'm Senior Constable Ricci," Luca's voice boomed out. "Any miners are to come off the staircase immediately. Remain behind the railing up top and leave a clear path for rescue services." It was pretty amazing that he managed to sound like a policeman who meant business, even in just his boxers. A murmur began up and down the staircase until Luca bellowed, "Now!" And suddenly at least a dozen of the onlookers, the three bike maniacs among them, straggling up and came to stand near us. Luca walked a little further down the stairs, and we could just see the top of his head as his voice continued to blast. "We need to get the child off the rock, and we don't have much time," he began. Sam whimpered beside me, and I put an arm around his trembling shoulders as Luca continued. "Those of you who are willing and able, I'm going to ask you for your help, and I'm sorry, but it's going to mean we all get a little wet." Uneasy laughter rippled down the staircase, and a couple more people straggled up to come stand with us kids. "We all have to work together, and you need to trust me." By the time the ambulance had pulled up 20 minutes later, along with the 2 bright yellow surf rescue vehicles, Luca had organised his volunteers to form a human chain from the bottom of the staircase to the base of the low jutting cliff that connected to the Sphinx rock. They were standing in water up to their waists, with their arms hooked together against the waves that continued to lap and crash around them. As we watched, I had Jed on one side squeezing my hand and Sam on the other side, burrowing his face into my shoulder while Aidan gently rubbed his back in comfort. The paramedics stayed up top while 3 lifesavers barreled down the stairs. We watched as they pulled themselves along the human chain. They grasped at shoulders and waists to slug through the rising tide until they got to Luca at the end of the chain. And then those lifesavers linked arms with him and each other until the last one, a young man wearing a wetsuit, managed to scramble up the craggly rocks and walk, then crawl along the back of the Sphinx to Merjame. By then, Penny had arrived in the police car. A woman sprang out of the front passenger seat and raced to the railing, and a paramedic had to hold her back from going further. I recognised her as Merjame and Arta's mother. The lifesaver had Merjame on his back and was crawling along the slippery Sphinx and connecting up with the human chain, which slowly started coiling back towards the staircase. I could hear Merjame's mum, her Mema, whimpering as she watched all these people pull one another along, and her little girl clinging onto the rescuer's back. The waves swallowed her legs, and her arms looked so tight around the lifesaver's neck. I wondered how Merjame wasn't choking him. I looked around and saw a tall man close to the top of the staircase. He had one of those fancy black cameras with a long lens pointing down to the scene and was taking pictures of all these people strung out along the back shore to save Merjame. When the first of the human chain came up the stairs and clicking got louder and quicker, the man took pictures of the paramedics and Penny, patting people on the back and offering them foil thermal blankets. And then a huge cheer went up and the crowd surged nearer to the top of the stairs to watch as Lucas staggered up, followed by the 3 lifesavers, including the one with Merjame on his back. The photographer went into overdrive, running around as everyone clamoured to pat Luca and the lifesavers on the back, shake their hands and keep clapping. It was Luca who started shouting again, Get back! Let them through!" He threw his arms out, clearing the way for the paramedics. Everyone went quiet again and started stepping away until all we could hear was the of the camera. We watched the paramedics rush up to Luca and the lifesaver, who were talking in low murmurs to Merjame. She only whimpered in reply. Eventually, the paramedics eased her off the lifesaver's back, leaving a streak of glistening blood on the wetsuit where her gashed leg had been resting. We could all see her trembling and hiccup crying, and her short hair was a matted mess on her head. Her eyes were wide and wild as she looked around, until they landed on someone who was pushing her way through the crowd, her Mema, and all the while of that camera.